Good evening. I think that's most of you here in the room with us now. Welcome to this evening's discussion of Who's Loving You, the new short story anthology on romance and desire written by women of colour. I'm Molly Rosenberg, I'm director of the RSL, and it's brilliant to be spending this Friday evening with so many of you. Hello to everyone, but particularly to everyone joining us from Mulberry School's sixth form. It's lovely to see you. I've got a few notes of housekeeping before I pass to this evening's chair. If you want to talk to each other during the event, you can use the chat function, which is just at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions for the writers, you can put those in the Q&A box that's also at the bottom there somewhere. Our wonderful chair, Marley Price, will get through as many of your questions as possible at the end of the discussion. So if you can put them in as soon as they come to you, we'll have them all ready to go. Members of the RSL team will also be adding links to different writers and programmes that come up during the discussion, so keep the chat open throughout if you want to see those as we talk. This evening's conversation is being led, I already know brilliantly, by Marley Price, who is an editor at Trapeze Books, working across the fiction and non-fiction lists. She's drawn to books with a strong narrative voice and with an important message at their heart. Marley is passionate about championing voices that have previously been underserved by and are underrepresented in the publishing world. We're so lucky to have her chairing this evening. Over to you, Marley.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for being here. It is such a joy to introduce the incredible writers that I have with me. So we have Sareeta Domingo, and Sareeta is the creator and editor of Who's Loving You, which I'm just shamelessly modelling here, and the author of If I Don't Have You. Her words have been featured in numerous publications, including Galdem, Black Ballad, Stylist, and Token magazine. We are also joined by the wonderful Rowan Hisayo Buchanan, who is the author of Harmless Like You and Starling Days. She has won the Authors Club First Novel Award and been shortlisted for the Costa Novel Award. Her work has been a New York Times Editor's Choice. And last but absolutely not least, we have the wonderful Daniellé DASH, who is a TV executive and screenwriter. She is a columnist for Trench magazine and has contributed to Black Ballad, The Guardian, Stylist, and Grazia. So thank you all so much for joining me. And obviously what unites all of you lovely women is the fact that you've all contributed a story, and Sareeta, you have edited as well, this amazing anthology. So I'm just so excited to be chatting to you all tonight about it. And I thought I'd kick off with a classic question that I actually found really hard to answer, which is, do you have a favourite love story? And if so, what is it? It doesn't have to be a book. It can be a rom-com. I'm here for TV shows, whatever you feel. Does anyone want to kick us off?
Ooh, I mean, I don't know why I'm saying I'll start when I don't necessarily have a specific one. But Beloved is my favourite book of all time, Beloved by Toni Morrison. And that has my favourite romantic lines of all time in it. Obviously, the book itself is not a romance by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a sort of thread of love between the two central characters that is really, really compelling. And kind of one of the characters at the end of the book, he says that Setha is a friend of his mind, and she puts the pieces of him back in the right order. And that's just like so beautiful to me. So I think that's my favorite romantic moment. But I don't know about the full story.
Strong choice. Sorry to kick off with such a challenging question. I was like, yeah. Danielle, what about you? Is there anything that springs to mind, or are you still racking your brain?
No, do you know what? I always forget this part of my canon of I love supernatural romance. There was such a long time that I was so deeply involved in anything to do with vampires and changelings, and they just made me so happy. And Nalini Singh, one of my favorite authors, she has a collection that all of the stories intertwine, and A Touch of Snow is my favorite in the collection of the side changeling novels. And I think just the fact that we had waited so long to see like the two protagonists, I don't want to like ruin it for anyone, also because my memory isn't that great, but I just remember it being one of the ones that I go back to. And yeah, I just love, I think because I'm really dramatically inclined, like I think anything that is like high drama and melodramatic and like swashbuckling and epic, like I'm just like you know, like so into all of that. So yeah, like I think that might be it. But yeah, like yeah, okay.
Great answer. What about you, Rowan?
So I think I really like stories about people who like really aren't great people but still feel love. And so there's a book called Love in a Fallen City by Eileen Chang, and it's sort of an anti-romance. Like everyone in it is terrible, and like the Japanese are invading, and there's all sorts of like greed and political machinations, but you can still feel that despite that, these very messed up people are still sort of almost fighting the feeling of love and not knowing why they're loving the people that they love. And for me, it feels very true, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it, isn't it? I think so often in our love stories, like we want to kind of have these two perfect people, and actually like that is just not life and not the way the world works. And I think something that, as we'll go on to discuss, all of you kind of navigate so brilliantly in your stories. But the first thing I was going to touch on, actually, Sareeta, in the introduction to the anthology, I think you really, really brilliantly sum up the impact that can come from a lack of representation within love stories. And I think that's something that we're all kind of painfully aware of, that actually seeing a love that is representative of us and our lives is all too often not something that a lot of people experience. And you sum it up far more eloquently, and I've just kind of butchered that, but I'm going to read your quote instead, which is, how did that condition young Black girls like me, or any people of colour at that impressionable age, to think about who society deemed deserving of that elusive fizzy feeling, those butterflies, that heartache? Was love and desire not for us? And I just wondered if you would be up for talking a little bit more about that, and also whether any of you feel that you found a depiction of love that kind of accurately depicts your own experiences, and also how that kind of potentially that lack of representation impacted you growing up, or shifted the way that you kind of perceive love and romance. Yeah. Sorry, that's a lot of questions in one go.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I say in the introduction, I do think that romantic stories or love stories in general are more important than I think people really give them credit for, in terms of, yeah, how that does condition society at large to view one another. And so if there's a lack of representation in any area of that kind of depiction, it can have a genuine influence on how we are viewed in real life. And I think romantic stories in particular are kind of often, not always, but they're often a fantasy of what desirability is, or what we aspire to in terms of romantic love. And you know, if we're not seeing ourselves represented, or we're not depicted in those type of stories, then I do think it means that we run the risk of not being seen in that way in real life. And I think that is borne out. And it's also important, I think, yeah, developmentally, to see that like people who look like me, or any of us here tonight, are seen as desirable. You know, that's a really core thing to our being. And if it's not depicted, then you know there's a problem.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, Rowan and Danielle, I don't know if you guys have got anything to add to that, although Sareeta has just summed that up so brilliantly. I don't know, in terms of your experiences and growing up without necessarily there being those representations, if that was something you were aware of or felt, or anything like that.
I think for me, representations, like I grew up in Zimbabwe, and so I was just like surrounded by Blackness all the time. And, you know, like my grandparents really didn't have to try hard to like, you know, equip me with Blackness. And then when I got here, like my mum was also just very much in that. And so like, I've just always had kind of places to look, so like Eric Jerome Dickey and, you know, like Colin Channer, and I'm realizing there's a lot of men there, but do you know what I mean? And so there were books that I had read and had seen myself in, and like, but I guess in terms of my actual experience as a young Black girl from South London who was queer and was constantly searching and still hasn't found that great love, I, you know, wrote what I would have loved to have read when I was 15 and 16, because I think there was so much of it that was American centered and that didn't speak to what I was, the kind of women who I saw around me who I was hoping to grow into. So yeah, like I think that being part of this and being able to create that and sitting alongside so much other work that's happening at the moment in the wider context, it just feels so good. And it means that the young women and young non-binary people coming up are going to have, you know, something to look at, that they'll know that they can do this and they can do it bigger and more audaciously.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I just got kind of shivers hearing you say that. It's just, oh, it's something beautiful that is here. And Rowan, have you got anything to add to that?
What has already been said is so wise and so beautiful, so I don't want to go on. I think for me as a mixed race person, so my mother is East Asian and my dad is white, I actually almost, I saw someone on Twitter, another mixed race person, complaining. People were always asking them like how their parents got together. And it just hit, I was like, wait, people are asking me that because I'm mixed race. I just thought that's a normal conversation, that you meet someone and you're like, oh, how did your parents meet? How did this cake recipe occur? And I think sort of very much that like that has always been consciously or subconsciously part of the storytelling of like how I justify that I was in the world. Is that a love story? Is that not a love story? How do you talk about that? And I find when I write mixed race characters, I sort of have to explain for them how their parents got together, that they can't ever just be, and it will always be about that for them. And I think being in this anthology and getting to write a character who is part Asian, but where she's also got so much else going on, and I've said this before, but I just really, it's amazing that I know people are gonna read the story and they're not gonna assume that she's white, which is otherwise to write a story in the world, that's going to be people's first assumption until you tell them that's not true. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's it, isn't it? And there's been so many conversations about, you know, writers of color and the expectations of, you know, Black writers, I think in particular, to kind of write about trauma and write about pain and suffering. And I've actually got a question later on that I'm now like, maybe it's time to bring that up and shake things up in my order. But that, yeah, it feels that we don't get to see that kind of joy enough. And now I can't find that question, so I'm just going to go on to the one that I have next. But you all answered that brilliantly, and yeah, it was great to hear your takes on that. But I think also one of my favorite things about the anthology, and there are many and I am biased, but A, is how brilliantly varied all of the stories are, but also just I feel like each one really transports us somewhere, and that actually the sense of place plays almost as important a role as some of the characters. And obviously Rowan and Danielle, both of your stories take place in London, but I feel like it's quite a different London. Like obviously Peckham is so central to your story, Danielle, and South London, and Rowan, yours is a kind of London that is maybe slightly of the future and feels quite hard to place. And Sareeta, obviously yours is in Spain and on the beach, and we've got a lot of like, oh yeah, feeling finally like I'm getting some heat on my skin when I read your story. But yeah, I wondered if there was anything that kind of drew you to set your stories where you did, particularly Danielle, obviously, because it's so at the heart. And I assume the title of your story, The Row, refers to the row of shops. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, that is absolutely right. And I think, you know, my formative years as an adult was spent working at my auntie's Jamaican takeaway. And so there was, you know, like it was hard, like, you know, working 12-hour days, feeding hungry Jamaican people and not patient at all. But it was such an awakening for me in terms of how many things are happening all the time, and then all of these different shops all have to like work together and like look after the community, and just not seeing that on TV, like in my work. And then also like at the time that I was there, like not seeing it in books, like not picking up a book and being able to smell the different smells coming together, and to like see and to like feel the sweat dripping off someone, like because it's hot, or you know, that moment where you kind of hold your breath because there's a group of boys but they're actually really nice because they actually just want to go to the shop and get sweets. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, it was just like important to like portray in a loving way. Like, I think so many times when people go to South London or any inner city part of London, it's always like this darkness, and it's like, yeah, okay, fine, but when summer hits, there's a special feeling that comes over you in South London, and I just wanted to capture that, but also that feeling when you've started falling for somebody and it's hot, because like you're hot inside and outside, and you're like giddy and you like lose yourself. And I just wanted to like to speak to that a little bit, and to I don't know, like make a historic record of it for when the aliens come in the future.
I think you do it so brilliantly, and I actually wondered you might be
sorry, I was just going to say that so many people have said to me from South, because I'm in South as well, how evocative your story in particular, like you just completely nailed that feeling of being in South London, like it's just so perfectly depicted, and that sort of symbiosis of the shops, and like you can go from the betting shop to the hair shop, you know, in your lunch break or whatever. It's just like, yeah, that depiction is so perfect, like so evocative.
Oh, thank you, high praise, I appreciate it.
Oh, but Danielle, I wondered if you'd kick off our readings tonight by reading us a short extract of your amazing story, so that all of our audience here who haven't had the pleasure yet of reading it can experience that evocative joy of hot summer love.
Okay, I'll go. There you go, babe. Mariah rested her hands on Edith's shoulders. Come back on Saturday at 6 and I'll get you ready for the dance. Thank you, Mariah, Edith said as Mariah swept the gown off and packed her tools away. She was methodical. How much do I owe you? For this bun and some hair oil. Don't irritate me, Edith. Mariah was smiling. Edith was up, desperate not to overstay her welcome. Thank you. She searched for something else to say. You coming in for the 5:35? I haven't seen you in Carmel's for a while. Mariah was washing her hands at a sink, drying them with a towel that she flipped onto her shoulder when she was done. Am I that predictable? No. I was just... Edith was panicking. I'm joking, babes. Wind chimes in rain. You're funny, Edith. Was she? Edith had never heard this before. Mariah looked at Edith then, and her lip corners tipped upwards. Edith's hands clasped at her back, gripped so hard. Mariah moved towards her. They were a breath away from each other. Mariah was whispering. I'm trying to be better, Mariah confessed. Then who? My dad? Myself? I don't want you to think I'm some gambling lout, you know. Oh, I don't think that. Mariah raised an eyebrow. What do you think of me, Edith? Before she could stop them, the words came running out of her mouth. I think you're smart and pretty and really good at your job. I'm an addict. Her admission landed heavily in the space between them. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Edith. It is what it is. She was casual about her pain. Edith didn't know what to say. Do you want to know what I think of you? A lion playing with her prey. What? Edith asked. You have secrets too. Hey. A man's voice and presence broke the moment, shattered it. Mariah peeled her eyes away from Edith. I have clothes to sell. You want dresses? I have jeans too, good ones. Mariah stepped back away from Edith. Edith felt altogether empty and angry at this man. Marvin, where do you steal these clothes from? Don't mind that. Marvin opened the duffel bag and started laying the clothes out on the chair. Edith moved towards the door. Thank you again. Saturday, 6, Mariah said, her hands on her hips and her focus on the merchandise. Edith was jealous of the clothes. Oh, and Edith? Mariah called out to her. Edith, hopeful, stopped and looked at her, quiet. I think you're pretty too.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that moment in the hairdressers when her hands are in her hair, like I could feel that in my bones when I was reading that. Just gave me all of the, oh, yes. And yeah, I feel like, you know, representations, as we've said, of, you know, of Black love can be rare. But I think particularly Black queer love is something that we just don't see enough of. And so I mean, you've spoken about your own kind of not seeing those stories and that feeling, and kind of, is that what drew you to write Edith and Mariah's story, or was there any kind of particular inspiration that drew you to those characters?
I think like I had, before I started working at my auntie's, for a minute, I worked at William Hill, and it was such a horrible experience because you see the ways in which like poor Black people especially are preyed upon, and when it comes to like mental health and the intersection between like gambling and addiction. And so for me, it was always something that I wanted to do, but to be kind to and to humanize the people. And I think that like it's so much easier if you fall in love with somebody who doesn't have flaws or doesn't have things that they're challenging, and that's not fun. And I just, yeah, I wanted to remember that time in my life, but also through a lens of hopefulness. But then also for shot of drama, because you know I'm a bit dramatic like that. So, but then as well, like I think, you know, I've come into my queer identity later in life. Like shout out to repression, and and I think that it's a moment for me to like kind of, because everybody in the story are like different parts of myself and different parts of people who I love, and so like writing it, because I was writing it, and I think it's the same for everybody, like last year during the first lockdown season 1, bang, bang. And it really, like, I fell in love with them and they kept me company. Why am I gonna cry? No, I fell in love with them and they kept me company during those really, really lonely first days. And yeah, like it was really healing. I can't cry, this makeup took me too long, wait. But yeah, it was really healing for me, so yeah.
Oh yeah, that, and I think for me as well, like editing those stories in the height of that and that loneliness and that isolation where like human touch was like a distant memory. So hopefully we are moving towards that hot, heavy summer where we can all like get all the human contact and all of that joy. But thank you, that is beautiful reading and a perfect summary of that. But Sareeta, obviously Who's Loving You is not your first foray into writing about love. And you know, what is it particularly that you love about writing about love? Is there something that draws you to it, or to romance in particular?
Yeah, I guess with my first novel, The Nearness of You, I didn't think I was deliberately setting out to write romance. It kind of just got categorized that way, and it is very much, you know, obviously there's a love story at its heart, but it's also sort of coming of age, and there are some dark themes in it. And so I think I kind of fell into it a little bit by accident. But then I realized that I love the compelling feeling of writing about two people falling in love. Structurally, it's very satisfying, both as a reader and a writer. And, you know, you kind of, you know where you are with it in a way. There's an expectation with romantic stories that in many ways I want to subvert, but there is also that sort of structure, I guess, of two people meeting. You want to give them obstacles, but they'll be falling in love along the way, and you want to see whether they'll make it. It's compelling as a reader, and you have a sense of what the conclusion might be. I guess if you really adhere to like traditional romance, you probably expect a happily ever after. I'm not always that kind of a girl, but yeah, so I think I was drawn to romance for those reasons, and the kind of connection between two people I really enjoy writing about. But yeah, I mean, there are challenges in that sphere of publishing. There aren't many people of color, as we have discussed. And I guess I don't also want to feel constrained by that, or constrained by genre in that way. But I do really love stories, which is obviously why I put this anthology together.
Yeah, because I think I always like pretend to myself, I think, that I'm a cynic and that I'm not a romantic. And then I'm the first person to cry at a wedding. I'm the first person on like 24 hours in A&E when there's a couple that's been together for like 60 years. I'm just bawling, always. But Danielle and Rowan, would you guys consider yourselves to be romantics, or would you say you're more kind of cynical when it comes to love?
Yeah, I'm a romantic. Like, I'm not cynical in the slightest. I'm always like, it will be okay, which is not always the case. So yeah, like I'm optimistic, and I think like that kind of hopefulness in Edith is very much like a part of me, and also like her kind of naivety, like babe, what did you think was gonna happen? Like, I don't know. And that's very much me. And so like just being kind of like to my inner child, and you know, like loving her the way that, you know, Edith eventually is loved. Yeah.
And how about you, Rowan?
I think that other people read my work and may think I'm a cynic, including this story, because the story is very much about the way, and it's probably a very nice reader on Instagram said this story struck me more about loving yourself, but you know, its story is in some ways about the way in which romance can be used when there's a power imbalance in certain ways. But I think I am deep down a romantic, because to me, it's sort of a wonderful miracle that we can all be so messed up and have, as Daniel pointed out, everyone has their flaws, and yet that we can still feel this for each other. And I think that still surprises me and moves me all the time. And I also really cry at weddings.
That really surprises me that someone got that from your story, that it was about loving yourself, because I think, you know, I guess your story, without any spoilers, is, I guess it focuses on quite a kind of forbidden secret love, but I think there's something so magical in that moment that's shared, even if it is, and again, no spoilers, but like potentially for a short time only. And yeah, I kind of wondered if you'd kind of give us a bit of an insight into the inspiration, because I think the world particularly that your story is framed in is sort of, it's kind of familiar to us, but it's a little bit potentially further in the future. It's unclear, and whether you'd give us the pleasure of kind of unfolding a little bit of what went on behind the curtain.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the it's sort of in the future thing, this story, the protagonist of the story's job is writing the jokes for ovens. And that sounds, because these are ovens that have AI, and that sounds ridiculous. But I met someone who writes the jokes for the Google Voice Assistant. And she explained to me that there are certain questions you can ask Siri or the Google Voice Assistant, where they'll use an algorithm to figure it out, or a sort of a big spreadsheet, but that computers aren't yet coming up with jokes. So when you say, tell me a joke, Siri, or, you know, the puns that go viral, that's some human being who wrote it, and they have human beings who write them in different languages to suit different markets. And so I was sort of fascinated by this, and I thought, I am going to use this in a story someday. And this was the story. So it's sort of, there's nothing in this that's impossible now. And the other thing, I suppose, is it's the canal appears, it's Regent's Canal. And despite my confusing accent, I was a child in London, and I'm now an adult in London. And for me, it feels very futuristic now, just especially that strip along the canal, because you really notice the changes, and everything is so much taller and shinier. And so I was just sort of imagining, okay, if this is what's happened in these few years, what's it going to be like in 10 years, not even that far in the future. So that's sort of the future aspect. But in terms of the romance, I think it was, a lot of the stories inspired really by the idea of what it's like to be young and alone and away from your community. And what does it mean when someone who is much more embedded and who you respect makes a romantic move towards you, even if it's not in like a explicitly monstrous abuser way, but just they have that power and you don't. How does that feel? What is that like? And that's sort of what the story plays out a bit.
And I think you encapsulate that feeling and that kind of like claustrophobia and stuff just so well. And I wondered if you would, oh, Chris, I'm just kicking my desk, sorry guys. But if you'd give us the pleasure of reading us an extract from your story, if that's okay.
I would love to. So the only context I think a reader needs to know is it's about this young woman who writes for ovens, and she hadn't been doing so well at her job, and so her boss has been trying to give her some extra help because she's not very funny and she's supposed to be writing jokes. The office air conditioner is a breath too cold, and she tucks her scarf tighter around her neck. There are windows, but they keep the blinds pulled down for confidentiality reasons. The day only registers as a fading glow against the white plastic. No matter how tired she is, Fiona is careful to be the last one to leave the writer's room. She wants to appear serious. Finally, as most of the others are packing or shuffling on jackets, Fiona gets up, ready to go. But as she walks past the glass partition, her boss calls her in. Is the notebook helping? I think so, she says, not wanting to sound too sure in case he's still unhappy with her work. Let me see, he says. She goes to her desk to retrieve it and is ashamed of the drunken way her letters wobble across the page. He holds it close to his face, a lick of pale hair falling across his forehead. He says he is working late and is planning on ordering in. Does she want anything? She is too awkward to say she was about to go home. The food arrives hot and greasy, but also a little sweet. She will remember this taste for a long time. They eat it, sitting together on the floor of his office. After he puts down his fork, he leans down and kisses her. She stays very still, not moving forward or away. His face is slightly scratchy, like the way it feels when a cat licks her hands with its rough tongue. Her brain begins to do fast recalibrations. I'm sorry, he says. I couldn't help it. You're just so... He pauses like he doesn't know what to say next. She wants to ask, so what? What am I? Please tell me. Hot, sexy, beautiful, young, available here. How does he see her? But she feels oddly as if she is the one who has made the faux pas. Has something been happening this whole time that she was too dense to see? She closes the noodles cardboard box and tucks the dirty napkin inside, her hands moving on autopilot. I'm sorry, he repeats. You can report me. I'll admit it. There won't be any negative... He waves a hand as if he's lost for words again. Anything negative for you? Her mouth feels greasy. She looks into his eyes and realizes they are hazel with a hoop of blue. He doesn't look that much older than her. He still has his hair, even if it is thin and downy at the temples. There are lines around his eyes and mouth, and she thinks they look like smile lines. She wonders what expressions are slowly rising up under her skin. Are there such things as loneliness lines? And then she says it. I'm so what? Lovely. He says the word slowly, lingeringly, like a child giving one last pat to a toy his mother won't buy him. You can kiss me again, she says. Leave it there.
Thank you so much. Oh, just, yeah, it's so wonderful to hear these stories read aloud. And also, just as I was hearing you read it, that moment that actually you and Danielle both capture in your story of that initial moment, and that, like, when you're not quite sure of the feeling between someone, and that, oh yeah, all of the excitement. Yeah, as I said, I pretend I'm a cynic, and then here I am like, oh, I can't wait to have that feeling of falling for someone again. But no, thank you so much, Rowan. And now I've refound the question that I should have raised up in to kind of feed on naturally, which was that often it feels like books and stories that center the love of people of color. I think when I was thinking back of, particularly as a teenager, of books that I read that kind of that did and that kind of centered people of color, and the things I was thinking of was obviously like Noughts and Crosses, which I love so much, but also like a book called Rani and Suk, I think, which was about an Asian couple getting together and the kind of warring of their families, and it ended with them both dying, and was just so traumatic. And I feel like all of that trauma and suffering, you know, however it comes about, just is a lot to carry. And yeah, I wondered if you thought that this has kind of started to shift at all in terms of the way that the love of people of color is represented. Obviously in this collection, like, we see all of the kind of messy forms of love, but outside of this, do you guys feel like there are other media forms where we're starting to see some progress in that, where we can just see joy for the sake of joy?
I mean, I don't feel like it's changing that rapidly in publishing. I still feel like, and it could be that it's a slow trickle down, but I personally feel like I'm still seeing a lot of books being commissioned that are expecting people of color to mine their trauma or write about their trauma in some way, or at least discuss race as the primary aspect of the story. I'm not saying that's everything that's being commissioned, but I feel like that is still quite a focus. And even in other industries, I mean, Danny will be able to speak to TV much more than I would be, but I still feel like while there are a lot of stories coming through that are, that aren't just about race, I'm thinking of like I Made a Story, obviously there is a lot of trauma in that story, but it's about a vast number of things in a mind-blowing way. And I loved Trigonometry, which was on BBC Two, I think, which had a couple that, you know, like a Black couple, and it wasn't about race at all, really. It was about a love, not a love triangle, like a polyamorous relationship. What's the word? There were three of them in one, like a throuple. And that really, I thought that was incredible. But I'm still, particularly in the UK, like British film, British TV, British publishing, I don't feel like the rate of stories that are just about joy is rapid enough for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry to interrupt
you. Oh, well, I guess with TV, things are slow. Things are very, very slow. I've been working in scripted development now for 5 years, and I've just had a show that I'm like EP and greenlit just at the end of last year, and TV, like publishing, has such a long lead-in cycle. So like, you know, from the moment that you've had the show greenlit, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 years before it's on screen. So 18 months to 3 years is the average for something to be on screen. And from what I can see at the moment, there are a lot of Black women being commissioned. There are not enough non-Black women of color being commissioned there, and I think that it's a crying shame, because there is this desire, that this understanding that like Black people cannot represent all marginalized voices. Okay, like everybody needs to be empowered to do that, and I'm always very worried about this idea of like, we're going to sort out the white women first and then we'll get to you, okay, and now we're going to sort out the Black women and then we'll get to the rest of you, and that is fine. But what happens is that the most marginalized amongst us, yeah, the people whose identities intersect with the most marginalized identities, like they're the people who are left waiting the longest. And it's like, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. And so for me, there's this kind of like, I'm joyful because I have multiple projects that are happening, but I also recognize that I want this for everyone. And at the same time, realize that it's not my responsibility as a Black queer woman to do all of this work, but realizing then as well that if I don't, who is gonna do the work? And so it's really challenging. But yeah, TV is slow, but I do think in the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to see this, the fruits of Michaela Cole's labor really coming to fruition. And that's that on that.
Yes, I can't wait for that. That's, yeah, that looking ahead. And what about you, Rowan? I don't know if you have.
Well, I'm excited to see those fruits, and thank you for saying all of that, because you said it so wisely. I think what the thing I struggle with when it comes to representation is, I feel like I read books that are by people of color that are brilliant and are about being a person of color, and where it is about the trauma, and the trauma is done so accurately and truly, and it breaks my heart, and it's brilliant. And I see works, I see in the equivalent of race-blind casting in fiction, but also, you know, in race-blind casting, where it's not at all about race. And that's also great and wonderful, but sometimes I feel like, for me, my experience of race is it's like one instrument in an orchestra of everything that I am feeling. And it is always there, but also there's so much else going on and so much other music and so much else I'm feeling. And I don't think we almost like critically have learned how to talk about works that talk about race and also talk about other things. The review has to be, you did such a good job talking about race, or ignore it entirely. And I think we haven't quite found the in-between place yet.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad this event is being recorded as well, because I feel like there's just so many nuggets of wisdom coming out of all of you that I just want to like jot down.
And I think to both of your points, I think it's been interesting working on this book and that term people of color, because it was important to me to have this be a collection of writing by British authors and British women, and to include whatever inclusivity I was able to within that. But it is so, there is that burden of thinking, am I getting this balance right? Have I approached the right people? Am I trying to do something too all-encompassing? And I kind of had to let that concern go and just approach basically people who I admired, you know, because I thought their writing was incredible, or that I knew their writing would be incredible, more so than trying to encompass all the things that might come from that kind of very broad phraseology of things like people of color and what does that really mean. So it was just interesting, Danny, when you mentioned that, I was like, yeah, that was something that I was kind of concerned with at first and then had to let go. But yeah, I hope that somewhere in this collection that there's more elements that people of color can identify with, or that even if you're not a person of color, that there are things that you can pick out in these 10 stories and think, this reflects my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, obviously, again, I am horribly biased, but I think you did a fantastic job in assembling such a fantastic group of writers. And obviously with your story, Sareeta, I think, again, without any spoilers, but that your opening starts with a moment of something that is traumatic, but that blossoms into something that's really beautiful. And I wondered if you'd kind of talk a little bit about the inspiration for The Waves Will Carry Us Home, and also maybe read us an extract as well, if that might be okay.
Yeah, of course. So I actually have the inspiration right here. So I'll hold it up. It was this photograph that I tore out of the Guardian newspaper like 10 years ago or something, which is an image of a soldier cradling a migrant woman who's just washed up on the shore. It's in Tarifa in Spain. And the image was so beautiful to me, but obviously, yes, it's rooted in sort of a traumatic experience of this woman. And in many ways, it might seem a bit odd to kind of project a romantic idea onto that. But something about it struck me, the connection between these two people who must be strangers to one another. And it kind of got me thinking about migrant people, but also just the inherent humanity of people and connections, missed connections, lost connections, and opportunities to reconnect. So I wanted to write a story that was inspired by that photograph, but does have a framework of hope. Maybe one of the characters, Andre, he's the more hopeful character inevitably because he's not gone through this trauma in the same way that Amina, the other character, has. So I guess the ending of the story is up for your interpretation. But yeah, I think there is a thread of hope to it, but that was the inspiration. That was sort of the catalyst for the story.
That's so amazing to hear. I didn't actually know that was the origin story. So to see that, and to see that newspaper piece as well, is really, amazing. Yeah. But yeah, I would love it if you would read us an extract, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So this is from the the beginning of the story, Andre is a Black British surfer. He has been on holiday, sort of traveling around, but he's now in Spain for the sort of final part of his trip. And he's out early one morning on the beach and sees a boat. Well, you'll see what happens. I dumped my stuff on the sand, letting a shiver shake me more awake as I stared out to that line of horizon that felt like it was always a part of my vision. But there was a shape on it that morning, moving, a boat. I looked left and right, not another soul on the beach. I pulled up my wetsuit, still watching. Then I glanced down to pick up my board, but looked back up because I heard a rumble, just a burst of one from a motor before it cut off into silence again. The boat was closer, a dinghy, I reckon you'd call it, nothing more than that. It was full though, completely full of tall, dark bodies, so similar to mine, but theirs bowed in disheveled exhaustion. I stood staring as it coasted in, sneaking with a shh up to the shoreline. The people, men mainly, a couple of women, spoke to each other in hushed voices, but I could feel weary euphoria coming off them as they spilled out into the shallows, pulling the boat up with them. None of them seemed to see me. Their gazes were fixed on that rise in the beach, and they ran to it, fast and urgent in one mass, out of the water, onto the land and gone. All of them except for her. She was the last one, and she took a few steps on foal-like legs. And as she took a few steps on foal-like legs, she stumbled and folded silently onto the sand, her face pressed into it, turned towards me. She was stunning. Her hair was cropped close so that the rest of her features could triumph. The smoothest skin stretched over her cheekbones, contorted by the morning light. Her lips were shaped like my most precious wave, full like a pillow and pale against their surrounding dark. And her eyes, massive and brown and so staggeringly beautiful there was no way I would ever forget them. They blinked at me, once, twice, 3 times, then air sank from her and she closed them. Hang on. My voice was low, but the sound of it jolted through the stillness. She was still too for a couple of seconds, and for those seconds, fear swept over me. Then she started to tremble, her long dark brown limbs quaking gently against the damp grains of sand, and finally I felt my legs engage. I let my board fall and grabbed my bag, my steps sounding like the rustle of brushes on a cymbal as I raced over the beach towards her and dropped to my knees. I was almost scared to touch her. I looked around for a minute, not entirely sure this was my place. I had no idea what the hell had just happened, but those people she had been with had gone, and I was all she had now. I flipped my locks out of my eyes and shook my worn, thin, oversized towel out of my bag, settling it over her as she shivered, her eyes still closed. The trembles of her body didn't cease, and so I did all I could think to do. Dropped down behind her and reached my arms over her, cradling into her whatever warmth I could offer. She smelled deeply human, and I lay flat on the sand, one of her shoulders shielded under my chin, her arm tucked into the crook of my elbow, my other hand gently supporting her forehead. I absorbed each tremor until she finally settled, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Instead, I continued to hold her, whispering low rumbles of comfort, even though I wasn't sure if she could hear or even understand me. I stared down at her beautiful face, and the tense gathering of her eyebrows finally relaxed. In exhaustion or peace, I wasn't certain, but I held her.
I'm sorry, I'm just like still in the moment and like not unmuting myself quickly enough. Oh God, that moment is just such a powerful start. And especially now, I mean, obviously the way that you write it is so evocative, but having seen that image as well, I think the combination of the two is just Oh, so beautiful. And I've still got a ton of questions and discussion points that I was going to come to, but we are at 8:20, and so we've had a load of questions come in from the audience as well, so I want to make sure that we have time to get through some of those, if that's okay. So one of the first questions we have is from one of the students who is joining us from Mulberry, and the question is, thanks for having us. What was a story that meant most to you when you were in sixth form? What inspired you?
Wow. The story that meant most to me in sixth form. That's hard to, I'm trying to situate myself in that time. I've clearly like blocked it out. I remember. Yeah, you go.
Like, I loved English literature, and like we had to study Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and it was such a moment for me in terms of reconnecting and understanding. I think something really politicized me just before I went to uni, and just before like Barack Obama came into office, and it was just like this really like awakening time for me. But I just remember being so in love with that world, and just the way that he like was speaking about like colonialization and like the effects of it on these human people, and so yeah, for me that was the thing that, and I just remember like going back to it over and over again, and it was so beautiful and devastating.
That's far more impressive than my initial thought, which was like Sugar Rush. I remember watching that on Channel 4. I remember reading the book. Like that was, yeah. So you've gone for a far more highbrow reference point. But Rowan or Sareeta, I don't know if either of you guys want to jump in.
Rowan, you go ahead, but I have thought of one.
Okay, mine was weirdly more of a place than an individual book, because the internet was terrible when I was in sixth form. And so I used to just go to the cult fiction, that's literally what it said at the top, section of my local bookshop, which was mostly really angry white men. But like I was like 17, so I was also quite angry. So I enjoyed some of them quite a lot. A lot of them also enjoyed incest, which I was less sure about, but was interesting in fiction. But weirdly, also, I think that Sugar Rush was there as well, and I didn't have enough pocket money at the time to buy it, so I read it all in the bookshop, and I feel quite guilty about. I read the entire thing while I was there. Anyway.
Oh my God, that was my childhood. In Borders books, my mum would just leave me when Borders books was still a thing, and I would just read my way through all of the books in there. It was, golden. Sorry, and Sareeta, and for you?
I actually remember reading Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, and something about the depiction of teenage female friendship really resonated with me, even though in many other ways the experience was nothing like my own. But that kind of friendship where you begin to question why you're even friends with somebody, or whether you really are friends with somebody, that really connected with me as a kid, as a teenager.
Absolutely. And then another question that we've got is, we've got a couple of questions about the experience of writing your story for the anthology, so I might kind of combine them. And someone asked, was writing your story for the anthology a relief? And did you feel it gave you space to express something that other publishers and commissioners have made you feel wasn't wanted or understood? And another question we had was, how much did knowing your story would be alongside other stories from women of colour impact your writing? So I mean, quite a lot to wrap up there into one, but yeah, whether you felt it was a relief to write it and the context of knowing it would appear alongside stories by women of colour.
I mean, for me, the story that I wrote, I think in general, I did feel a sense of relief because of the control, I guess, that I had, being that I sort of collated this project and edited and all of that, that I felt more at liberty to write whatever I wanted. And I do think to an extent it was freeing in the sense of not feeling I had to immediately adhere to a particular type of story, but I just knew it had to be sort of a love story. And in terms of having my writing alongside all of these women, I mean, it's a bit egotistical to be able to like manipulate a situation where my writing is alongside Rowan's and Danny's and all these other incredible people in the collection. So if nothing else, I'm incredibly grateful to even have my story alongside theirs. It didn't really, you know, obviously I knew what I was planning to do or what my objective was with the book, so I didn't feel it was sort of changed, or what I wrote was changed by the other people in the collection in that way. No.
I guess like so without getting emotional, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to check that app and check where I am in my cycle, because I'm well emotional today. But I had given up writing for screen and like any idea that I was going to do like fiction, and I was just focusing on producing and like writing about race, gender and popular culture for like different stuff and things. And I think I applied for the Fourth Estate book something, and I didn't get it through, and I was like devastated. I was like, well, I can write, and so I was devastated, but I put it on my website and Sareeta read it, and so I hadn't been pursuing it, but Sareeta saw something in me, and it came at the right point to like activate this remembrance of my talent, and to have someone like Sareeta like recognizing that, you know, I just needed a bit of encouragement, like it just meant the world. So it was like a release. And I don't know what the other part of the question is, but yeah, like I loved writing it. And oh yeah, and about being alongside all of these other women like Kachenga and Dorothy Coombson, and you're just like, oh my God, and Rizzo, like reading everybody's stories. Like I was like, my shit's next to this. Like this is so cool. So yeah, like it, but I didn't feel any pressure. I just think the way that like Sareeta structured the whole process just made it feel like something that was just an utter pleasure. Even the redrafts and the drafts I didn't feel upset about that. I just found it to be a joy because I wasn't expecting it. So yeah.
That's so lovely to hear. And sorry, for you, Rowan?
So I'd actually written this story before Sareeta asked, and it was the story that I wrote from love of wanting to tell the story and having no idea if it was going to have a home. This long, strange story about ovens and love. And so I think in that way it wasn't shaped, but I think, you know, the edits that we had, and you know, if anyone's listening, editors change your work. It makes such a big difference. And Sareeta's edits were so like sensitive and subtle, and it was the sort of edits where you're like, oh, I should have done. Why didn't I do that? Of course. So you know, that was amazing. And you know, I've already spoken about sort of not having to explain myself and being in this book meaning so much to me, but I think also, like as a mixed race person, you can feel a bit like, oh, I don't belong anywhere. And I think I just feel tremendously grateful to be included in this book with these amazing writers, and that, you know, they had space for me and in this community. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to get emotional, so I'm going to be quiet.
I love these emotions. I'm here for all of the emotions and feelings. And I think, yeah, it's just testament to, I mean, Sareeta's incredible eye for talent and amazing skill as an editor and as a writer, and also, yeah, all of you for, you know, being so deserving, as you say. Like I am, as I've said time and time again, horribly biased, but I do truly believe objectively that this is such an extraordinary collection of, you know, talent and brilliant writing. I'm mindful that it's 8:29 according to my clock thing, so I don't know how much more time we've got before, I don't know why I'm saying clock thing, just my clock. But yes, I don't know how much more time that we've got before we need to wrap up. I think we've only got a minute. So I will, we've got time for one more question. Awesome. So one more question was, do you think there is an increased appetite for positive stories about people of colour following the amplification of the Black Lives Matter movement and associated trauma last year? And if so, do you think the famously fickle publishing industry will sustain this? This is a good question.
I think the appetite has always been there. And I think publishing and many other industries have kind of just been catching up to that. But it is cyclical, you know. Marley, obviously you work in publishing, so you know, but like these things come in cycles where people remember that like marginalized people exist and maybe they want to read, or, you know, so I do think that there is an increased awareness of it, and that can only be a good thing. Yeah, I really hope that the publishing industry will be paying attention, and part of it is books that don't just focus on a particular aspect of race or trauma or whatever being popular, you know, successful. So let's hope people buy collections like this. There are many, many people doing that work already and putting those books out there. So I hope it snowballs.
Yeah, I agree. And I think so much of it also comes down to the gatekeepers of publishing, right? I think publishing has so notoriously been so white in the past. And I think that diversification and greater representation within the industry as a whole will hopefully also translate. But I don't know if you guys, Danny or Rowan, if you guys have got any takes on that to add.
Yeah, no, I just think that, like, you know, we exist and we're such a huge part of the economy in the UK and globally. So it's not good business sense that this isn't happening and isn't happening at a faster pace. Like, it's like, guys, you are going to bankrupt yourself. There's only so many times, and I'm talking from a TV perspective, there's only so many times we can tell stories about corrupt police, okay? Like, it's fun, we enjoy watching it, but come on now. And so it's like, when you know, we've known for years now that there's a financial benefit to empowering people of color, and your active like decision to not do that means that you're not even thinking about money. It's just about purposely disenfranchising people to keep you feeling safe. But those times are changing now, and because we're getting more people who are not afraid, like Sareeta, like myself, like Rowan, like you, Marley, who aren't afraid to speak truth to power and be like, hey, that's bullshit, or whatever we need to do to get this shit going. And I'm really excited about the generation coming up, because they do not care about people's feelings. They're not waiting for anyone to do anything. And so for me, and again, my relentless optimism, I'm just like, yeah, it's gonna be okay. And I think the time, especially in TV, the time of trends, it being like, oh my gosh, Black people exist, I think that's coming to an end, because more and more we're starting to see Black people become the gatekeepers now. All skin folk are not kinfolk, and everyone's not going to be there for the same reasons that you are, but it just means that we have more avenues to go down where we're able to create lasting change that's going to affect everyone in a positive way.
Absolutely. And yeah, just so inspiring, and knowing that we've got so many members here from Mulberry who, yeah, are that next generation that are coming up, and yeah, can bring that as well to the fore. Yeah, that optimism I love. Rowan, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
So this is more from, I do not have the insights into TV, and I'm not a publisher, but what I know is that the people who reach out to me most on social media are young, specifically young women of color. They're not always East Asian. They're not always in the UK or in the US. Sometimes I'm like, how on earth did you get my book to where you are? But I am so excited that you did. And they're so passionate, and some of them have big followings and some of them have small followings, but they're really excited to talk about books, about the race in the books and other things in the books. And I think, to me, like, there's a lot wrong with social media, and it causes a lot of ill in the world, but I'm hoping that will, the one good thing is that people will see that the people reading aren't all lovely, tall young men from Oxford. They're not lovely, but, you know, there are other people reading too, and that, you know, and that's helping them become more visible, and that hopefully the industry might acknowledge that. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, and I hope that, as you say, like there's a lot of other books alongside this book, but that, you know, that this book really stands up and is a place where, as you guys have said, that hopefully there will be people who will read this collection and find a story that looks like theirs or is something that they can aspire to be. But I think that might be all the time that we have. I don't want to like cut us short again, because there's another great question of romantic gestures that I'm like all up for discussing. But Molly has put back on the screen, so it might be my time to pipe down.
Mute.
So sadly, my face popping up means that we have to finish, we have to wrap up. Thank you so much, Marley, Rowan, Danielle and Sareeta, for such an amazing way to end what I know for so many of us has been a really hard week. If you haven't already got your copy of the book, you can buy it now through the RSL's page on bookshop.org. I think the link is going into the chat now, so you can have a look at that. Every book you buy through bookshop.org will come to you from an independent bookshop, so it's a great way to support those two at a really difficult time. If you want to come to all of the RSL's events online, and I think this is a pretty good recommendation for all of our events, you can buy our brand new digital events pass for £25. That will give you access to around 25 events about words in all their forms over the course of a year. And there's a link going into the chat now. See, Annette knows. And you can find all of the information on the RSL website too. One of our next conversations will be in April with Neil Gaiman and Marlon James. So you can buy your pass now to book for that, which is going to be pretty good, I think. I think it'll probably be quite good. If you're a writer looking to learn and get support from other writers, please look at our new mentoring program in partnership with Sky Arts. The Sky Arts RSL Writers Awards will give 5 emerging writers of colour a year of mentoring from an RSL Writer Fellow. The link's going into the chat now, beaming it to Annette. So please enter. The programme is being led by RSL Vice President Bernardine Evaristo, and all the writers being mentored will have a group mentoring session with Bernardine as well. So definitely worth submitting. The deadline is the 1st of May. If you want to find out anything more about the RSL, you can go to our website, our Twitter, our Instagram, and we'd love to see you again soon. I hope that everyone takes this beautiful evening into a great weekend. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for setting us up so well into the weekend. Until next time, good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.